This is the Rank Amateur Podcast, number 6. This is the Rank Amateur Podcast. My name is John Kearns. My co-host is Ben Wyatt. Benny, what's going on? It has been a minute since we've got the chance to sit down and chat, podcast or otherwise. So how's it going?
Yeah, so I think a little life took over, right? Had a little bit of travel for work. Got to do some fun things out there. I think we mentioned it last time. Was going to get a chance to ride the motorcycle out there, and we did. So that was fun. We got to do a little loop out in Vegas. Kind of a scenic loop. We weren't able to go to some of the places we wanted to go because of the weather.
Uh-huh.
We actually had snow in Vegas in some of the northern routes. Yeah, it was crazy. And so we weren't able to see some of the things we were intending to see. We got to go to Red Rocks. We basically hit a loop on the outskirts of Vegas, out west. Got really close to California in a little town called Pahrump. Had a little bit of lunch there, and then we headed a little north as we could to avoid the weather. Saw some really cool things. We're out in some remote travel. Hopefully, we'll throw some video up of that, and just got to see real scenic areas. So that was cool. But honestly, that's over, and now the real world's back, and now I've got to get the RV ready for a couple of camping trips we got coming up, and unfortunately, had to mow the yard for the first time today. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been up to over the past couple of days. How about yourself?
Yeah, well, I'm on mow number 3.
Okay.
And I'm just mowing weeds. I'll be honest. But so back to your trip real quick. No Hoover Dam?
No Hoover Dam. The group or the couple that we rode with, they had a funny thing happen. Had some flight trouble. They got into Arizona, then they couldn't get to Vegas on the last leg, so they ended up renting a car and driving.
Yeah.
They went and saw the Hoover Dam on the way in. Let's just say they weren't as motivated as we were,
Yeah.
and we didn't really realize where we where we were at. And once we stopped and took a look at the map at lunch, we were 2 or 3 hours away. I mean, we were on the west side of Las Vegas, so we had to have the bikes back at a certain time. We weren't able to get there,
Yeah.
but
Well,
I looked at some
it's
pictures.
an incredible thing, and it's not the kind of thing you need to see twice in a weekend, I'll say that. So probably the right call, but I think, your work life takes you to Vegas, enough to where you're gonna have another chance, and you ought to take that chance. As for me, my wife and I have really intentionally tried to prioritize rest lately. Obviously, we had a big trip at the end of the winter. We got some things on the horizon, both in work projects and fun. So really the last 3 weeks for us has just been laying low and really intentionally not trying not to program much on the weekends. So we've gotten a few smaller house projects done. We have been going to bed early, getting up early, just trying to get in a good cycle for what should be some pretty exciting things to come this year. I've been doing a lot of yoga, actually
Oh, okay.
quite a bit of yoga. So just as a matter of exercise, but as I've mentioned, I'm still rehabbing from a significant knee surgery, and I'm really happy to report that that's starting to go really well. But I can credit yoga on that really by kind of switching my focus from these programmed exercises and everything that the therapist had given me to just sort of doing it myself, doing what I was comfortable with. And so that's been pretty neat. And I have been studying for that ham radio test that we talked about so much last time.
Okay. All right. Tell me more about that. How far along are you?
I'd say I'm probably getting close to about halfway through that course. Unfortunately, I've been a little irregular with it. So not quite ready to schedule the test, but it is on the list. Hopefully, I'll have something to report there in the next, I don't know, few weeks, month, maybe. We'll see. We'll see. With that, Ben, what have we learned this week?
Well, this week I've got, I believe, one of the first shows that I've shared, and it's a Guy Ritchie flick, new show on Netflix called The Gentleman, not to be confused. I believe there was a movie maybe in 2019 that was called The Gentleman. This is a series on Netflix, and it it's quite interesting. It tells the tale. It's almost like it's almost like a peer like a look or a glimpse into the aristocratic England or European society mixed with the dark underworld of the black market in various formats, right? So um, the setting is kind of a little bit all over Europe, but the idea is that the dukes and the earls of the British royalty, if you will, or the English royalty, they have massive properties, thousands of acres, and it tends to offer an opportunity for the underworld to thrive, and it's kind of it's kind of a dark comedy. Again, it's a Guy Ritchie flick, so a lot of the main characters are really really well played. The cinematics and the scenery is great. The editing is awesome. I mean, it just keeps you interested, and it's there's only 8 episodes. We're already through it. We're already ready for season 2.
Got it.
But it's something that I'm not gonna put it in the category of The Wire just yet, right? But,
Careful.
it's something that, once you watch the first one, you're like, "Alright, let's watch the second one." Then you look up and you've watched all of them.
So,
So
is this a story told in the present or is it a period piece?
no, not it is a present story, so it's fairly well done. You can tell that, the resources they've used to kind of put together the storyline and the types of scenarios that are found, they've done some homework. Well, at least it appears, right? So I haven't participated in the dark underworld and European aristocracy, but it tells a good story. It keeps you motivated. There's a lot of action. um Reminds me of like a Snatch,
Okay.
or movies like that, Lock, Stock and Barrel, I
Yeah.
believe. So really cool, lot of British humor, and really sharp and witty, dry humor. So I think it's something worth checking out, and that's what my wife and I learned this week.
Well, that makes sense because I think at least one of those films you mentioned is a Guy Ritchie film. I believe Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels is Guy Ritchie, but I could be wrong about that. Well, very cool. That sounds great. That reminds me really quick. I know a few episodes ago I recommended The Bear,
Hmm.
and so I understand that it is filming now, and it is actually tacked on a 4th season, and it will just plow right through and film 2 seasons at once. So I'm pretty pumped about that. In addition to the fact that Severance is currently filming. So, for someone that
Okay.
doesn't watch a ton of television, probably more than I want to admit, but I don't watch a ton of television. I have two landmark series that I'm really looking forward to. Hopefully, maybe late this year. Hard to say. Um, but as far as what I've learned this week, I have learned that Poor Things is a great, great film. So I had actually not really it had not been on my radar, Poor Things. And then Emma Stone won the Oscar for Best Actress for her performance. So that intrigued me, looked it up, found it on Hulu. Sarah and I watched it and absolutely loved it. This is a big film with really big themes, explores questions of human nature, morality, all kinds of really, really big topics. I will say there is a great deal of adult content. In fact, I'll just go ahead and tell you, it uses a whole lot of sexual themes as a device to really tell this story. So be forewarned. If you've got kids in the house, you probably want to wait till you've put them to bed before you turn this thing on. But it's a fantastic movie with two masterpiece performances. One from Emma Stone, she deservedly got the statue for that one, but then also Mark Ruffalo, who I will say I had actually never really connected with before as an actor. I never really got him as an actor, but he has won me over with this performance. It's incredible, and the whole thing is sort of draped in this really over the top steampunk imagery, which, you may or may not love based on your own personal taste. I found it once you sort of get used to it and, kind of forget about it and sort of accept it as you watch it, it's not that distracting. In fact, it actually just kind of becomes pretty cool. But, Poor Things is fantastic. Have you seen it yet?
Not yet. I've seen it on the screen. We just haven't clicked on it yet. So now I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it takes a minute to set the premise. The first 5 minutes, you're gonna be looking at this thing like, "What have I gotten myself into, and what is it that people call entertainment these days?" But once it starts to click, you start to get into this world, immerse yourself in it with all that steampunk stuff and realize who's who, it really starts to take off, and man, it is a ride. And so, Poor Things, I cannot recommend it highly enough. The Rank Amateur Podcast is brought to you by Hop Passport, who wants you to know that we are in the final few brackets of March Brewsanity. This is where beer lovers across the world get to vote on their favorite breweries. We're in the last couple of rounds, and pretty soon a national champion will be named. So head over to hoppassport.com, vote for your favorite brewery, and learn in the coming weeks who will be named the 2024 national champion. Hop Passport is the company that believes that you should drink local and that local is wherever you are. All right, Ben. Well, let's get into the main discussion today. Um, we're several episodes in now with this podcasting thing, and I think we're really starting to get into the heart of what the Rank Amateur podcast is all about. And we've talked about some neat things, but now let's really get into something, because one of the things that we hoped to really make central to this podcast is discovery and learning. And you tie all that up in things like travel and adventure. And there are all kinds of really neat things we're going to explore here. And really, the first sort of new experience that we're going to explore is fly fishing.
Mhm.
So, Ben, question: what experience do you have with fly fishing so far, or fishing in general? Tell us your fishing story real quick.
Well, so for fly fishing, I've seen it in movies. I've seen anglers as I've driven up the Ocoee, on my way to various places. But personally, hands on, none. Right. My fishing background would be quite a bit of bass fishing.
Yeah.
Was a um, was a part of the Chattanooga Bass Association for a couple of years, so I'm very very versed on bass fishing in lakes. But as far as fly fishing, you know, looking to learn everything.
Well, you and I grew up in a lake region, right?
Hmm.
So, and bass fishing is big here. We live very near right now a Chickamauga Lake, which is a world class destination for bass fishing. I will tell you that that kind of fishing has never really taken with me. I've done it before. I'll do it again, I'm sure. And in fact, we should probably explore it on this podcast. But it just so far has just never struck me as something that I wanted to continue investing my time into. However, fly fishing always intrigued me. Number one, it always looked really difficult. And, or earlier on in my life, I thought, man, that's just too much to take on. It's so technique driven. It's like, I don't know, it's like the banjo of fishing, right? It's just so specific that I was sort of intimidated by it, but intrigued. So I have a little bit of a head start over you in fly fishing because I have fly fished before, but not a lot. So my story really comes down to the fact that several years ago, I just decided I wanted to try it. So this is going back uh probably 10 years ago now. I wanted to try it, and so I picked up some gear at an Orvis shop, really sort of their entry level stuff, and tried some fishing here in some local streams. And at the time, I just happened to be spending a little bit of time in West Virginia. Great fly fishing destination. And so I did a lot of solo fishing on creeks in West Virginia. And that's where I really sort of learned the rhythm of fly fishing and figured out that, casting is more accessible than maybe it looked to me initially. And it's really kind of where I fell in love with it. However, I didn't do a whole lot with it. Number 1, I'll go ahead and save you the suspense. I never really had much success from a catching point of view. So done a lot of fishing, not much catching. Um, and then the other thing is life kinda got in the way, wasn't spending time in West Virginia anymore. One reason or another, I just fell out of the habit. Then there was a mishap in the garage and my first fly rod broke, blah, 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 blah.
Welcome to fishing.
Yeah, right. So I've put it down. Last year, I decided I wanted to pick it back up, and it's not coincidental that you and I had been talking about starting this podcast, and so I, wanted to pick it back up and spent, I guess, 2 or 3 mornings on the Hiwassee River trying to get my rhythm back and figure this thing out again. Once again, not a whole lot of success, but did find the rhythm again and relearned why I'd been so intrigued and how much I enjoyed it in the first place. So that sets the table, and that's where we are. So, Ben, you've seen it done is about all you can say for fly fishing, but you and I have committed to where we're going to go through a process of discovery, trying to figure this thing out, understand the why of fly fishing, and maybe even enjoy a little bit of success with it. But what are your thoughts as we enter this process?
Well, I don't know what I don't know. That's for starters, right? So the first thing that I'm really trying to wrap my head around are what are the species that we're targeting? What's their pattern? Where, what's their seasonality? What's their cycle, if you will? And what am I looking for in order to, to increase the odds of catching versus just fishing all day? I mean, have you been exposed to that? Do you have any idea of what you're going after?
Well, I think that if you look at the world of fly fishing, the answer to your question is all. Any sort of species of fish on any sort of water can be caught using fly casting techniques. However, when I think of fly fishing, I think when most people think of it, they're thinking about streams. We're talking about mountain rivers and creeks right out of the movies. That's what my mind goes to, and that's what I was initially interested in. Now, I think this is a conversation for another day, but I can also tell you saltwater fly casting looks really interesting to me, but I know exactly nothing about that. And so that's almost a topic in and of itself. But I think for our purposes here, what we're talking about is the type of fly fishing that's going to be most accessible to us being where we are. So that is going into mountain streams and angling for trout. Now,
Okay.
that is not the only answer to this question. We can explore further. There's no doubt about it. But I think if we're going to dip our toes into this world, I think we need to say we're looking for brown and rainbow trout, probably largely for us on the Hiwassee River, although we've got options. We are in Southern Appalachia after all. A lot of really great stuff in Western North Carolina, other parts of East Tennessee. So closest to our driveways is going to be the Hiwassee River. Feels like that's going to be our home base.
So walk me through some of the considerations. I'm very well versed of what to consider when we're bass fishing. What are some of the considerations that you've seen when you're heading to the stream, right? When it's time to go fishing, what are you thinking about?
Well, when I think about what we need to learn, I've got it broken down into sort of three main categories. There's gear, there's know-how, and then there's just other. So let's talk about know-how. And it really starts with why would a fish bite your hook? And this comes down to understanding insect hatches and mimicking that insect behavior on a river. Now, that is a body of knowledge in and of itself when it comes to the fly fishing world, right? Probably one of the largest and deepest bodies of knowledge that we're going to need to get into. But I think, for our purposes as rank amateurs, where we're going to start is with this concept of matching the hatch. In other
Mhm.
words, how are the insects behaving in that given season, that given month, or that given week? Now, then at that point, you need to choose flies and cast those flies in such a way that mimics that behavior so that these wily trout think that they're feasting, but they're actually grabbing your hook. That's the idea.
Sure. So conceptually, I understand the match the hatch theory. I guess when you're looking at bass fishing, you've got, and it sounds like it's similar with fly fishing, but you've got a top water game, if you will. You've got maybe some beneath the surface, either swimming actions that you have access to, and then sometimes you're on the bottom dragging things. So I've never quite understood how you'd be able to do all three with a fly rod, but I'm sure they've got ways, right?
Yeah. So, true to this podcast, I'm sure I'm going to get some of the jargon wrong here in this first episode about this hobby, but to break down two different categories of flies, there's wet flies and dry flies.
Okay.
Dry flies you will cast, and they are designed to float upon the surface of the water. So you will have seen a lot of really neat National Geographic footage of this beautiful fly floating down a mountain stream and a trout rising to the surface to grab that fly. That's what we're talking about there. Same thing happens with wet flies, except these go under the surface to some degree, right? And there's all kinds of ways you can set your line, your tippet, and your leader, and strike indicators and weights in order to get the right depth based on the fish you're trying to attract, the depth of the water, the the stream you're on, the season, any number of different factors. But these wet flies go below the surface, again, to do the same thing, to to mimic insect behavior so that fish will strike at that fly thinking it's food.
Okay, so you've mentioned insect behavior. Now, is there a version of fly fishing that mimics bait fish, or is it primarily focused on insect imitation?
To my knowledge, we are mimicking the behavior of insects. Right. To accurately answer your question, let's move out of the rank amateur realm and find an expert to answer these questions, right?
Sure.
So so this is amateur on amateur right now. Anything that I have experienced in the world of fly fishing has been about mimicking insects. But let me also mention this. There are the insects that breed and hatch in the water itself, but there's also this element of what we call terrestrials, right? So there are flies that look like ants, for instance, right? There are seasons where those are more attractive to fish.
Okay. So there's never, at least in a fly fishing setup, in my brain, you've got top water, you've got something swimming through the water column. This is for bass fishing, right? And then sometimes you're dragging things across the bottom, right, mimicking crayfish and things like that. So if I'm picking up what you're putting down, we're pretty much focusing on mimicking insects, and there's not a lot of heavy tackle that's going all the way to the bottom on a fly fishing setup.
Not to my experience when we're talking about stream fishing.
Okay, so John, what are some of the other elements of fly fishing that we're going to have to consider?
Well, so of course we need to understand these insects and their hatches. And we need to understand the fish. We need to understand why we're there, who it is we're looking for, and then, how do we do it? So there's a lot of elements here, but let's just start with casting technique, right? So the idea here is you want to make these flies move like these insects. So that all comes down to technique and, not letting your line, for instance, get ahead of the fly in a way that's distracting and makes it look unnatural, right? So there's a whole science behind that where you're looking at the weight of your leader and making sure that that's appropriate for the weight and size of the fly that you have tied on. Whole lot to get into there. And let's talk about knots, which I will say that I kind of find one of the more intimidating parts of the whole thing. Now, you know, having done it a few times, it does seem to me that you can kind of get away with knowing 3 knots really well. One of them most folks know is just how you tie on a fish hook. But then there are different elements of your line that you're going to need to tie together for different scenarios. And so I think if you know 3 knots really well, and don't ask me to name them at the moment, um, then I think you've got a lot to go on. However, my problem is every time I get back into fly fishing, I need to jump on YouTube and do a refresher and practice a little bit. That just is what it is. Of course, with practice and more time out on the water, it'll get a lot more natural.
Well,
Not
and well, I'll throw this in there too because I used an app when I was, fishing for bass often. They make apps that you basically type in what you're looking for, and then it'll kind of give you a visual. I In bass fishing, we used a Palomar knot primarily. It looks like you can use that in fly fishing, but I'm sure there's some specialty knots, and there's reasons for them.
sure. I spent a really frustrating hour trying to figure out how to tie a nail knot this
Mm.
past fall. I want to do everything I can to find a way to avoid trying that thing again because it bested me, frankly, that knot did. And I've got a good friend who quite likely we're going to hear from pretty soon who, can kind of tie a nail knot behind his back, which is crazy. It's absurd, frankly. But let's not let that dissuade us, right? So we're going to commit to learning small handful of knots, and we're going to be well prepared to hit the water. The other thing here, Ben, is gear, right? So we have to get started now. I think anyone will tell you you need not spend a fortune to learn to fly fish. But as with all things, spending a fortune is absolutely available to you. If you wanna lighten your wallet by tens of thousands of dollars with nothing but Sims and Orvis gear, and Patagonia gear, it's available. Absolutely not necessary. And I think the most tenured, experienced, high profile fly fishermen would tell you the same thing. What they want you to do is get on the water and enjoy it and understand why this is such a beautiful thing to add to your palate. The priority is getting out on the water and doing the thing. So
Mhm.
we are going to try and get both of ourselves out on the water at the lowest price point possible. And then from there, if it really, wets our whistle at that point, we can continue the investments however we want to do that. But
Well,
go
well,
ahead.
wait a second now. You threw out a couple of names there: Sims, Patagonia. So I'm assuming we're talking about clothing, apparel, things outside of rods and reels, and that's where you can really go nuts, as well as going nuts on a rod and reel combo and all the other things, right?
That's right. They figured out a lot of ways to take your money, and, as they should, right? I mean, this is, it's a great hobby, and these are companies doing great work and being innovative, right? I mean, you've got Patagonia, who's, a leader in the apparel world here. You can get some great, in fact, I have Patagonia boots. I think I found a special somewhere, and they're great. But I can tell you that my rod and reel are absolutely entry level, an absolute entry level combo at the lowest price point. So, I've got a mix there of, sort of your premier brands versus just the stuff I picked up at Bass Pro because I got the itch and I was in a pinch. And also, again, to be where I am and experiencing this, I don't have to spend a lot of money.
Mhm.
So there's rod and reel, tackle, and you can go nuts there, but you can you can get in the game for 125 bucks if you want to. Then there's waiters. So in certain seasons, that's going to be less important. But I think in Southern Appalachia, waiters is going to be probably a 3 season requirement. It's awfully cold in those mountain streams. Boots, and then other, right? You got to figure out a way to carry your flies and your extra line and tip it and whatnot. And so I think I've talked here. I've used a chest pack for that recently.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah. So we can keep going. We can have a just here for the gear megasode on fly fishing, but let's cool our heels a little bit and let's just get out on the water.
Agreed. I guess, we've covered the gear at least a little bit. We're dabbling with what to consider. Maybe we should talk a little bit about what we've got planned in terms of our camping trip coming up in the Cohutta Wilderness and maybe our first time out there, at least my first time out there.
Yeah. So I think that we need to spend a little bit of time, in prep. So let's think about the streams, right? So like I said, what's most available to us is probably going to be the Hiwassee River. We've got the Cohutta Wilderness, the streams there, the rivers and creeks in the Cohutta Wilderness in North Georgia. You and I have talked, and we've got a date circled in April for a camping slash fly fishing trip in the Cohutta Wilderness. I think the only thing we lack there is a final permanent thumbs up from our wives about that date. And then we can pretty well book that. I think that's going to be a really great place for us to, for lack of a better term, get our feet wet in this thing. But in the run up to that, let's let's go down some rabbit holes. Let's think about the fish themselves. Let's think about the season and the hatches that will inform our early gear purchases,
Mhm.
right? Big and small, right? So there are a lot of different sizes and weights of fly rods. Do we need an 8 weight fly rod on a small northern Georgia mountain stream? Absolutely not. Probably going to go with a 4 weight there, maybe even smaller. But we probably for our first, we want a real general use, versatile rod and reel, the matching line, and then we will get down into the flies themselves. And that really is going to be a question of asking our local fly shop, what's the hatch right now for where we're going. That will inform that. And then other than that, this is just preparing for a camping trip. And hopefully, um, we get to have a lot of fun being out in that beautiful part of the woods, in North Georgia, but also, maybe we'll have some early beginner's luck out on the fly stream as well.
Yeah, I think I'm excited. I don't know if you've gotten to spend much time in the Cohutta Wilderness, but it's extremely secluded, right? There's an abundance of acreage to choose from. But my wife and I got the opportunity to camp there before, I was ever interested in stream fishing. And we've got the spots picked out in our head. We know exactly where we want to take you. If trout follow similar patterns to other fish, specifically bass, we're really looking for points. We're looking for current. We're looking for areas, and the camping spot that we have kind of mapped out. We're going to be right there. We're going to be able to fish from the bank in the river, and we're basically looking at where two smaller streams come in a V and create a larger stream. So I'm hoping that all of this means that we're going to be in a good area, but we might find ourselves, getting in the Jeep or the Bronco and going and finding another one because they're all over the place.
All of that sounds really appealing to me. So I just think about being in one of those mountain rivers or creeks, and if you're at a convergence of 2 streams, I mean, the idea is you've got your waders on and you can go up one or both of them and walk your way up, try and find these great holes, try and find trout that way. But, we do need to know what we're doing. It's going to take a little research. Now, as the Cohutta Wilderness, I have not been into the Cohutta Wilderness proper.
Hmm.
Now, just to for context, we live in Chattanooga, Tennessee. The Cohutta Wilderness is, I don't know, 30, 40 miles from us.
Yeah, about 45 to an hour.
Okay.
Mhm.
So It's a large nature preserve. I don't know if it's state or federal land, but it's a large, large mountain wilderness, and kind of on the other side of that to the southeast is a place we've talked about before, which is Blue Ridge, Georgia. So
Mhm.
I've sort of skirted around the outskirts of the Cohutta Wilderness, but never dissected through it, which is sort of what we're theorizing for this April camping weekend.
Mhm.
Really looking forward to experiencing that. I can tell you the wilderness in North Georgia is just so beautiful and pristine and ancient and, kind of virginal woods that it's just really special, in the same way that the Great Smoky Mountains is that way, right?
Yeah, I think it's, what's cool about it, there's about a 70-75 mile-ish or so loop, kinda just fire service road. I mean, we saw minivans, sedans, and obviously off-road vehicles going around it, but what's cool is there's a lot of Native American history there. There's a lot of homesteads or remnants of homesteads scattered through there, a lot of wildlife, a lot of logging trails and different stuff. What's interesting is that you're studying for your ham radio right now, and when you get in there, there's actually the way to communicate with park rangers if you need help or things like that is through ham radio, and they have repeater systems there. So I think we'll get to play radio right a little bit while we're up there, and then also see some breathtaking scenery. So I'm excited,
I'm
even
glad
though we may or may not catch anything.
right, right. And look, I'm glad you mentioned the radio thing. That gives me an objective, and that always helps. So, look, I think this is gonna be fun. So, as for the podcast, I think we're gonna talk about fly fishing quite a bit in the next few weeks, although not exclusively, right? So, I
Mhm.
mean, with a lot of things, we're moving into an active season. A lot of things are gonna come across our plate. We have some other things sort of percolating in the back of our minds about other activities we want to take on and learn, some travel, some trips. But we're going to talk quite a bit about fly fishing in the next little bit. And with any luck, we are looking to line up some special guests, some actual experts, some non-rank amateurs to help guide us through this. Both some folks that are local and maybe some folks from farther afield. So really looking forward to that. Hopefully, getting that scheduled pretty soon. So this is it, man. This is what the Rank Amateur Podcast is all about. Let's learn about fly fishing. Let's experience fly fishing. Let's both be bad at fly fishing and maybe get a little bit better at it and understand the why of fly fishing and add it to our palate, right? I love the idea of finding a weekend and a reason to go fly fishing when, a few years ago wasn't on our radar, right? Something we can add to our lives.
Mhm. Well, and you make a good point. I mean, the nature of this podcast is just learning something new and having fun doing it. But at the end of the day, John, you know as well as I do, we are just here for the gear. So this week, John, what do you have? What is the gear?
I love how we race to intro this segment. Really great. Uh, okay, so I actually have 2. So I'll go with one first, then you can share yours, and I'll come back and do my second.
Okay.
Uh, um, Sarah and I have been experimenting with different ways to make burgers at home, and it's spring now, but lighting the big egg grill, in the winter and going through all of that is a bummer because it's cold outside.
It's a friggin' process.
Yeah, it really is. So, 30, 40 minutes to heat the thing up, and then, the burgers are on the grill for, 8, and, it's just you don't wanna do that when it's 25 degrees. So, we started experimenting with making smash burgers, inside on our stovetop, and so we use a Lodge cast iron, griddle, flat griddle. Um, and I picked up a grill press from Lodge Cast Iron, right? I mean, grill presses aren't anything new at all, but I found this one at the Lodge Cast Iron store nearby here in South Pittsburgh, Tennessee, and we had been experimenting with smash burgers, and, finding all kinds of ways to sort of, uh, find a way to weight these things down with just what we had on hand. Then we went and got this cast iron grill press, and that was it. Like, that's what made our smash burgers perfect because we had the right tool. So, and it's made by Lodge Cast Iron, which is the premier cast iron, maker probably in the world.
Mhm.
It's a Tennessee company.
30 minutes down the road, 40 minutes down the road.
Yeah, and so, they've got a factory store and picked up the grill press, and then that's what did it. That's what made our smash burgers perfect. So, um, I have been, over the years, very proud of different recipes for burgers that I had come across and perfected on the grill over the years, but I think I have a new favorite, and that's the smash burger style, but this grill press is really what put it over the top and made these things perfect for us.
Only I mean, it looks like it's only 22 bucks, and you're telling me 22 bucks is standing between me and a perfect burger? Come on.
Yeah,
Come on.
yeah,
All
so get
right.
grill press. What do you got?
Well, so this week I have, chosen an EDC product. I like to have a certain amount of gear on me at all times. One of the things that, I like to have is a sturdy and reliable pocket knife, and I've got a couple that I kinda rotate in or out. But I think the most functional one I have, the smallest form factor, the blade profile that allows me to do a myriad of things from, opening Amazon boxes all the way down to like maybe cutting slices of apples, like slicing an apple or whatnot. And I've even pulled this out to use, for dinner, depending on the situation. I'm a big Benchmade fan. This is a Benchmade knife, and specifically the Mini Osborne. So the Osborne is an Australian inspired design, and an Australian rancher inspired design, and this particular one is the little brother. So this
Mhm.
is the Mini Osborne 945, I believe is what they call it. Mine came in the black and blue version. It's like a G10 scales blue version, but I have actually got it in my pocket right here. I've found new ways to spend more money, and I've put a more of a coyote look on this. So at the end of the day, having a good pocket knife is one thing. You can definitely get by with having something much less expensive. But I've had the cheaper, the Chinese made knives. A lot of times they're using inferior steel. It's hard to keep them sharp. So if you can actually keep track of it, it's kind of like buying a nice pair of sunglasses. Like, you'll lose the cheap ones, but you might hang on to the more expensive ones. At least that's what I tell my wife. Even though I've lost the expensive ones, but I tend to hang on to this one, and it's just the right size. You can't really feel it in your pocket. It's extremely light. The it's a Make sure I'm telling you this correctly. It is a S30V steel. It holds its edge pretty well. I don't have to sharpen it that often, and it's just a nice thing to have. It's a step above having like a box cutter in your pocket. It gives you a little bit more functionality, and it's something that if you're not looking this thoroughly at your knife, then maybe this isn't for you. But if you do see a need for having a blade that's functional, and this is something that I believe is a good option, pending, your budget.
Well, this is a beautiful tool, no doubt, and, of course, I struggle with EDC, but let me tell you what I love. Uh, I absolutely love a good configurator,
Hmm.
and Benchmade will let you customize this thing with a looks like a good several thousand different options, and
Hmm.
as you've been talking, I've already started playing with the engraving on the blade, and
That's right.
man,
That's right.
it's fun. It is so fun. I don't know, uh, I would love to commit to owning one of these things. I just fear for how long I would actually own it. So, maybe let me get my life together a little bit, and maybe then I'll be a Benchmade man too. But look, I've seen, and held your knife. It's beautiful. It's a great tool. The thing is well made. It's top of the line. So, great suggestion, and
Well, and I'll add too, it's the design that actually made me fall in love with Benchmade, if you will. But if you'll notice, the Axis lock, that's what they're known for. There's other good knives. There's other good knives at lower price points, right? But the ability to take a mostly legal in most states, a manual folder, but be able to have it come out quickly, and then more importantly, have it fold without putting your fingers in front of the blade. I'm in love, right? But there's other options out there. But yeah, this is what I've got this week, and I think we've beat a dead horse here. You can with Benchmade, you can spend as much as you want, as you've seen if you're on that configurator.
right.
But that's all for this one. I've got a couple more we're going to pull out at later times. But what's your next one? What do you
Alright.
got for us? What's the
Yeah.
last piece of gear this week?
Well, this next one, I am really going to stretch the definition of gear with a Spotify playlist.
Okay.
You know what, Ben? No. On this podcast, music is gear. That's I've just I've made the decision. Tunes are gear. So, this is perfectly legitimate. So, look, back, I don't know, a few years ago, maybe during the pandemic, I can't really remember. I started making playlists on Spotify, and I would make a playlist for every season. So for a year, and I would tend to say I would make these things over the course of a couple of months, and then I would say, well, okay, on the first day on say the spring equinox, for example, that would be the day I would be done. And then I would enjoy the playlist for a little while, and then after a while, move on and start building the summer playlist. And on the first day of summer, I would be done there. So it just turned spring, and I just thought I would share my spring Spotify playlist, which I've called Defrost. And so another kind of note, not to make this too much about me, but sometimes like over the years, you kind of look for ways to mix it up and find a reason and a way to make these playlists interesting. So sometimes I've made them with a theme in mind. For instance, last winter's was only it was called No Words, and there were no lyrics, no singing in
Mm,
any of the tracks. And in fact, it was mostly classical music of one sort or another. This one is called Defrost, and there is absolutely no theme whatsoever. This is an absolute potpourri. The only thing these various tracks have in common is that I happen to like them. So this this thing has everything from The Temptations to Bjork, right?
okay.
It's weird, and, look, there's no reason for you to listen to it other than if you just wanna turn it on and see what you think, check it out. I've got a link to it in the show notes, but my Spotify, handle is John Lewis Kearns, and the playlist is called, uh, Spring 2024 Defrost.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm gonna have to check that out then.
All right, man. Well, I think that kinda does it for the pod this week. We got some things cooking. We've got some learning to do. We got some reporting back. We got some interviews, some special guests coming. I think it's a really cool season for this podcast. I'm really excited for what's to come and look forward to connecting with you again next week.
Yeah. Likewise.
All right. Well, you've been listening to the Rank Amateur Podcast. My name's John Kearns. My co-host name is Ben Wyatt. If you'd like to get in touch, you can reach us at rankamateurpod@gmail.com, and you can find photos related to these conversations on Instagram at rankamateurpod. Also, we have a website now, rankamateurpod.com. Of course, always thanks to the great team at Hot Passports for sponsoring this show. Until next time.